Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at the development of slavery. So the overarching essay question to this is discuss the interrelationship between a successful cash crop, cheap land, and cheap labor in Virginia, and show how its interrelationship led to the development of the plantation system and what effect it had on the arrival of slavery. The discussion must include the economic, moral, and political rationale for the acceptance of slavery as well. So, what I want us to keep in mind with this lecture is that this is pivotal. This is foundational to understanding of early U.S. history and frankly, history all the way up through the present day. The history of slavery and how it affected American culture through politics, race, class, and various aspects of its culture cannot be underestimated. And this, in the very beginning of the development of slavery, is going to lead directly to the Civil War. And in many ways, what we're going to be studying is, from this essay on, is seeing how this institution, developing side by side with the institution of slavery, developing with the institution of republic democratic political systems, is going to create such a schism in society that it's going to lead directly to the Civil War. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're going through this lecture and through the rest of the semester. Here we go. So this part of the I want to give a little bit of an introduction before we get to concept one. So it's important to understand where slavery begins. It begins in Virginia, specifically with the development of Jamestown, beginning in 1606, when King James I issued the first Virginia charter. The document authorized the London Company to establish plantations in Virginia. The London Company was a dynamic business venture with two objectives: profit and glory for England. And its leader, Sir Thomas Smith, was reputed to have been London's wealthiest merchant. In December of 1606, 3 ships left England with 120 men for the New World and arrived in the spring of 1607 with 104 men at the site of Jamestown on the James River. Jamestown's early development was marked by incredibly hard times, due primarily to the poor geographical location. They built the original fort on a marsh. The settlers were not mentally or physically prepared, and poor leadership. So the beginning of this colony is marred in all sorts of problems. The bad location was a virtual island linked to the mainland by a narrow isthmus. It was chosen because of fear of surprise attack, but instead it provided the surprise when its low, swampy area produced salt in its drinking water and malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So the water is brackish, it's salted. That's not going to be very good for people's health, and it's just inundated with mosquitoes, and so it's going to be a disease-ridden area. The first colonists were not well equipped for enterprise, and they consisted largely of decayed gentlemen, as it would have been put back then, or the second sons of gentry. Some artisans, soldiers, and a couple of sailors, and some young boys as well. And so this is an important thing to understand because most of the people going here have no background in labor, work, developing basic infrastructure in the middle of what they would have perceived as a wilderness. They're there because they believe they're going to follow in the footsteps of their Spanish and Portuguese predecessors who had come, generally speaking, and struck it rich in Central and South America with gold and silver. But unfortunately for the English, what they run into is they go to a place that is not bountiful in gold and silver, and so this is going to pose problems for the people who first settle here. They're going there with the wrong assumptions of what's going to be there, and when they get there, they don't have the abilities, the background, and the know-how of how to set up a society from scratch. Almost instantly, the colonists began quarreling instead of cooperating for the common good. Because of the poor leadership, many of the first colonists spent their time hunting for gold instead of planting crops and establishing a stable community. So it didn't look very good for these folks. Survival was rough in the new environment. And by the spring of 1608, only 53 men were alive. The colony was saved from total ruin when Captain John Smith took over and established a hard, regimented lifestyle in Virginia. Although these individuals, as perceived to be lazy, whom he forced to work, came to hate him, he did manage to keep them alive. Smith brought order out of anarchy until about 1609, when, due to injury, he was forced to leave the colony and return to England. So between 1609 and 1610, the remaining Virginia settlers lacked capable leadership, which led to the worst years of the colony, as people turned to cannibalism to survive. The period is often called the starving time. With the bad winter, lack of supplies, and Jamestown under siege by Native Americans who killed anyone who tried to leave the area, the population went from over 500 to 60. As a result of earlier deaths along with those of the starving times, the odds of staying alive in Virginia were about 1 in 12 during the first 3 years of the colony. For the first 17 years, things were about the same, as about 10,000 settlers sailed to Jamestown. About 8,000 made it, and only about 1,275 survived by 1624. Why had so many colonists died in a land so rich in potential? The burden of responsibility lay largely with the Virginia Company. So after 1609, the Virginia Company was called the London Company was called the Virginia Company. Supporters of the Virginia Company were in too great of a hurry to make a profit. Settlers were shipped to America, but neither housing nor food awaited them in Jamestown. Weakened by the long sea voyage, they quickly succumbed to contagious diseases. Company officials in Jamestown also must bear a share of the guilt. They were so eager to line their own pockets that they consistently failed to provide for the common good. Jamestown took on characteristics of a boomtown. There was no shared sense of purpose, no common ideology except perhaps restrained self-advancement, profit-making. The company's scandalous mismanagement embarrassed the king, and in 1624 he dissolved the enterprise and transformed Virginia into a royal company. So at first it's basically a corporation, and then King James comes in and he has the state take it over, basically nationalizes the colony, making it a royal colony. The changes in government had little impact on the character of daily life in Virginia, however. As a financial proposition of the colony was a fiasco. The shareholders lost an estimated £200,000. However, there were some positive events to occur in Virginia during this early formative period. A fortunate byproduct of the company's effort to strengthen the Jamestown settlement was the formation of the first representative assembly in English America. 22 burgesses, representatives, were chosen, 2 from Each of the 11 plantations that had been established, each was called the House of Burgesses, and the meetings were held in the church, where the First Assembly exercised legislative, executive, and judicial authority, all of which were confined to local problems. Although the precise instructions have been lost, historians generally agree, after reconstructing the evidence, that every adult was allowed to vote, including indentured servants. This made Virginia a far more democratic society than any other place in the world. The independence of the House of Burgesses was limited in that any laws enacted were subjected to the acquiescence of the Virginia Company in London. The body developed because of the growth of the colony and ever-changing economic and social conditions required the colonists have more political control over their environment. Thus, self-government was not an American creation, but it was partly an outgrowth of the conditions in America which made it necessary for survival, right? So basically they're thinking, hey, we're out here in the middle of nowhere. London is 3,000 miles away. If we're going to make it here, we got to figure out policies and laws that will benefit us in the immediate. At the same time, it was an invaluable legacy from England. The concept of limited power of the monarch was widely accepted in England, starting with the Magna Carta in 1215. By the beginning of the 17th century, this idea of basic rights and limited government had evolved from the English mind and experience, and was transmitted to the English colonies in the form of this enlightened and far-reaching governmental system in Virginia. This process is called germ theory, just for your basic reference. Another event, but this one was of social significance, saw the Virginia Company in 1619. They sent 90 young women of marriageable age to the colony. The Virginia planters were to pay 120 pounds of tobacco for the passage of each woman. The purpose was to give stability to the colony by creating a pro-European lifestyle, as 90 families were automatically created with the importation of the women. At the same time, 100 London slum children were dispatched to Virginia, where they became apprentices. This practice continued from time to time, as reflected by the events of 1627, when 1,500 kidnapped children were sent over to Virginia to provide needed labor and settlers for the colony. The background on economic development of Virginia, what's further to be understood is the chief objective of the settlement of Virginia, which it did not accomplish, was to find gold. Virginia's charter of 1606 specified that 1/5 of the gold and silver found belonged to the king. As mentioned, gold fever so seduced the minds of most of the early settlers of Jamestown that they nearly died from lack of food. Also, one of the main reasons for the founding of Virginia, as well as the Carolinas and later Georgia, was to produce a variety of specialized products. It was thought in England that silks, figs, olives, lemons, oranges, and other highly desired commodities could be successfully grown. England also desired Virginia to produce glass and other raw materials such as tar, pitch, and timber. However, none of these above-mentioned products proved to be very profitable during Virginia's early years. Virginia's economic future was assured in 1612 when John Rolfe successfully planted the first West Indies tobacco seeds in American soil. The tobacco culture set the pattern for life in Virginia from that time until the Civil War. Virginia remained the leading producer of tobacco in the United States until the war, when it was replaced by Kentucky, owing to the devastating effects of the war on its economy. All right, so that's going to do it for the introduction. The next clip you'll be visiting will be Concept 1. So I'll see you there. Take care. Let me know if you have any questions.